Hello, EDU 304, and welcome back to our third installment of the Enneagram. Today we're going to focus on Enneagram number 1, often labeled the Perfectionist. And just like every number on the Enneagram, no one number is any better or any worse than others, but every number has a wide spectrum of behaviors and motivations depending upon the health, mental, emotional, physical, of the individual or lack of health. And so on this spectrum, a 1 could look very healthy in that they're committed to a life of service and integrity. They're very balanced and responsible. They're able to forgive themselves and other people for being imperfect. You can probably guess by the title, the label, the Perfectionist, that they're driven to perfectionism. That's what a healthy 1 might look like. Moving down that spectrum ever so slightly, a 1 who's living in kind of an average mental health state often possesses judging and comparing mind. They're comparing themselves to other people. They're judging their actions, their abilities in relation to those people that are around them. They naturally spot errors. Sometimes this can be positive and beneficial in the case of businesses and those types of things, but often struggle to accept those errors and those imperfections. And at the extreme unhealthy end, a 1 can fixate on imperfections, becoming obsessed with micromanaging those aspects that they're able to. And as you might imagine, the perfectionist is often tempted or prone to obsessive control. So as we dig into type 1 here today, we're actually coming to the conclusion of our first triad. If you take a look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that we have so far covered Enneagram numbers 8, 9, and 1. And many of you may have wondered, why on earth are we beginning with number 8 instead of beginning with number 1? Well, there's a reason for that, in that number 8 is the first number in what's referred to as the gut or anger triad. And so all 3 of those numbers, 8, 9, and 1, because they're in a similar triad, meaning there's 3 of them, they're almost like a family. And as different as these Enneagram numbers are, they do have some things in common based upon their relation in the triad. So let me remind you of something we talked about at our very first lecture over the Enneagram. I said that a triad is a way of describing how you as a person, or how a particular number, regularly takes in, processes, and responds to life. Remember, our personality and our Enneagram number is based on the way that we perceive the world, the way that the world operates in our mind. And the challenge when we're dealing with relationships with other people is that oftentimes those in our relational network don't view the world through quite the same lens that we do. Okay? One broad way of viewing the world is through a triad. Obviously, 8s are much more dictatorial or commanding than our 9s, who are almost to a fault laid back and passive. And then 1s, of course, which are very perfectionistic. All of those have differences, but they're all driven by the anger or the gut triad, which means that all 3 of these numbers are driven physically by anger. They take in and respond to life instinctually at the gut level. And so their natural response, whether you're an 8 or a 9 or a 1, is to respond to life physically through your body, and anger is the most easily manifested of those sorts of reactions. As we progress further through the Enneagram, we'll talk about the feeling or heart triad, composed of Enneagram numbers 2, 3, and 4, that are driven much more by feelings and emotions. And then we'll also get to the fear or the head triad, numbers 5, 6, and 7, which are numbers that are driven much more by fear, and they take in and relate to the world through the mind intellectually. So we're wrapping up the body, the gut, the anger triad as we continue with our discussion here today on number 1. As previously discussed, the deadly sin of both 8s and 1s is anger. Though anger manifests itself differently in a number 1 than it would a number 8, in that oftentimes this anger shows itself through resentment. That might be a more apt word of describing the way that an Enneagram number 1 might feel towards others. 1s are perfectionists, they're chasing perfection, and they often possess an unsettling type of feeling within their heart or their mind, like someone's going to jump out of the woodwork and blame them or criticize them or even punish them for any mistake that they make. Part of this is biological, okay? It's nature, it's the way that they're programmed to think about and view the world, and part of it is certainly bred through their nature and through early childhood experiences and so on and so forth. Because 1s are often rule followers, they will most frequently defer pleasure to take on responsibility. And this resentment can manifest itself in situations where maybe they have a sibling who prefers to do what's pleasurable, maybe texting on the phone or playing video games, rather than completing their homework or doing their chores or whatever. And it's going to naturally manifest itself in resentment. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus speaks to this when he says that he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." So here we witness in verse 40 through Martha this resentment that her sister Mary has chosen to sit at the feet of Jesus and not prepare the food and the bedding and all of these other things that are required when you have a guest or a visitor in your house. But note the Lord's reaction to her. He says this very, very famous quote. He says, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." I don't often highlight Bible verses in this class, even as we regard the Enneagram, but I thought this was just too clear of a scene from the Gospel of Luke that I had to use it as a way of sort of visualizing or displaying how this perfectionist nature might display itself in relationship in our lives or the lives of others. Just like all numbers on the Enneagram, there is a dominant emotion, and for number 1s, that is control. They want to control their lives, and that means they want to control everything that is input into their lives, whether it's scheduling things out, organizing and structuring their house or their day. And then we also, they're prone to a reaction formation. And what that means is a psychological term that when an uncivilized impulse arises, they automatically push it down and bring up its opposite to negate it. So maybe there's something that they're instinctually driven to do, but this reaction formation says, no, I need to have control of my life, and that is not control in my life, and so I'm going to bring up some opposite thought or action or behavior, and I'm going to do that instead. What's interesting about 1s, and I think about this in particular with 1s that I have tried to recognize within my own life, is that sometimes this perfectionism is not perfectionism holistically throughout their entire life. The perfectionism of a 1 might be maintained in only one area of their life. For instance, the neighbor whose house is a mess, but their yard is immaculate. Or the person whose room is a disaster zone, but their car is perfectly maintained in every way. The talk style of a 1 is what we label preaching. Casual conversations with others can quickly turn to teaching and then from teaching into preaching, because perfectionists have a way of thinking about and organizing their lives, and they desire that everybody they come in contact with would also organize and structure their lives in a similar manner. Ones don't necessarily think they're being critical, and this is important to distinguish. In their minds, they might be pointing out imperfections and flaws, but it's all based on a desire to help and to get things right. Remember, they're rule followers. And so if they see something that's outside of the lines or outside of bounds, their natural reaction is to help. And one way that that is shown is through criticizing or pointing out the flaws as they see them. So one way that healthy ones are counseled to maintain their friendships is to consistently work towards being less helpful, especially in their casual relationships in life that don't necessarily need to be organized and structured as much as a professional relationship might. In childhood, again, this is stereotypical, but oftentimes ones attempt to be model kids. They want to know the rules, they want to know what's right and what's wrong, where the line is, and they want to follow them. And this is important as we think about assessment, and we talk through, when we're giving assignments or we're developing rubrics, making sure we clearly articulate what is expected and required of students, because ones, they're going to do everything you ask them to do. You just need to make it as clear and precise as possible so that they're able to follow those rules. Oftentimes, especially in youth, number ones are comparing themselves to other kids. They might shy away from sports and other activities where they don't excel. And this is kind of a negative, and where growth mindset, intentional teaching of habits of mind can be helpful to students. If they don't perceive themselves as being good at something and they're a perfectionist, then they don't want to do it, because what if somebody sees them making mistakes? And so it's important for us as educators to encourage healthy mistake making as long as it's leading to growth. In relationship with others, ones often classify things or people or projects as either perfect or wrong. Again, that sort of dichotomous black and or white thinking. Often they struggle to show their emotions, might not necessarily hug or say I love you. They're more practical in their feelings. They might provide security and opportunities for loved ones. So in my own life, I have a very close relative who's a number one. And although I've been close to him, for all of my 35 years, I can count probably on one hand the number of times we've legitimately hugged. And I can't recall a time where he vocalized the words, I love you. Now, it's been made clear to me since I was very young that this individual did indeed love me, and he showed that by providing opportunities for me, by providing material things for me, and support in other ways. But as I was reading through the number one, it became clear that this is just a part of the struggle for ones oftentimes, is in the way that they show their emotions, which is very different, as we'll find with the number two, in just simply saying the words I love you or showing some sort of physical affection. In times of stress, number ones will naturally move towards the unhealthy end of a four, which is individualist. They'll become a more pronounced inner critic of themselves. Their need to perfect the world goes into overdrive, and they might physically become resentful of other people. If they have the perception that they have failed in some way, maybe they've lost a job, or they failed a class, or a relationship has broken off, they can become much more sensitive to those types of things and can ultimately become incapacitated by depression. But there is hope in states of security. A number one can display traits of healthy sevens, which are the enthusiasts. They become more self-accepting. They can become more spontaneous and fun and open to trying new things, even if they're not great at them, and are able to shift their perception in some measure away from everything that's wrong with the world to begin recognizing some of the beauty that is inherent within the world. Once again, I give you some celebrities or famous people. Some I would encourage you to emulate, others maybe not so much. And then because it does take a team, and the world does require certain people to fit into certain jobs where perfectionism is a healthy trait, I've just listed some of these careers. When I think about flying on an airplane, I sure do hope that my pilot has a perfectionist nature in landing that airplane successfully, right? They're not going to say, well, I'm about 80% on that. Same way with an engineer who might be designing a large building or a bridge that I'm traveling over. I sure do hope that there's kind of a perfectionist speaking in the back of their mind, making sure that all of those mathematical equations are done correctly. Same with a pharmacist who's formulating my medication. I want to make sure that that's done in the right way. Or I even think about down at the bottom there, a physician or some sort of surgeon. There are careers where being a perfectionist is key. There are other careers where it might not be. And there are certain jobs within any organization or industry that are better fits for ones than others. But this is just a brief sampling of some of those. Thank you for your time and attention today. I know we've run a little bit long. I do apologize for that. I will see you again very soon for Enneagram number